Hello everybody and welcome to the Bike Week 2020 webinar series by Galway Cycling Campaign, funded by Galway City Council and County Council through the Government of Ireland Active Travel Initiative. We're here this afternoon in Galway to discuss safer roads, safer cities, better lives, the view from Europe and the UN. And I'm delighted to welcome so many of you across the country and indeed from across the world, from Portugal and sunny California, to today's webinar. Please join us in the conversation in the chat, and we will be making this available for audiences around the world online on our YouTube channel. My name is Martina, and I'm Deputy Chair and Spokesperson for the Galway Cycling Campaign, and I'm joined here by my event team, Cecilia Rubin and Mia O'Leary, who are Deputy Chairs, Oisin O'Neill and Dominic Whelan from the Galway Cycling Campaign. Today is Make Way Day. It's a national day to make way on our streets for people with disabilities, and activists all over the country are talking about ways to make it easier and safer for people of all ages and all abilities to move about our towns, cities and villages safely and easily. And this ties in quite nicely with the purpose of today's webinar, which is about road safety. And we say that a road, a street, a residential area that's safe for children to play and safe for older people with mobility issues to move through safely is a kind of place that we want to live in. We're talking today about the impact of international and UN policy on road safety, on street safety here in Ireland and particularly here in Galway. And the decisions made by the European Commission and UN have an impact on road design and how we manage our speeds and in our urban roads, our residential areas, and on our country bordering. Our guests from Europe will share how and why safe walking and cycling infrastructure and reducing speeds must be at the heart of mobility evolution in Europe. I'm delighted to welcome our guest speakers. We have three of them today. Townsend, Policy Director of the European Transport Safety Council, Rod King, MBE, Director and Founder of 2020 for Us, and Matthew Baldwin, Deputy Director General for MOVE at the European Commission and the first European Coordinator for Road Safety and Sustainable Mobility. At home, I want to those of you joining us, I want to pay a special welcome to people from the Road Safety Authority, to Transport, Tourism and Sport, the National Transport Authority, city and county councillors, road engineers from local authorities across Ireland, and people from as diverse places as Portugal, Portadown and Cork. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Ellen Townsend to give her presentation. Unfortunately, Ellen had trouble logging web-wise today, so we're going to have her on phone, but her presentation will be shared. Ellen is Policy Director of the European Transport Safety Council. She's almost 2 decades of experience in European public policy, including 12 years as a senior policy expert at the ETSC. For 3 years, she was responsible for EU enlargement policy at the Worldwide Fund for Nature's European Policy Office in Brussels, with special focus on transport issues in relation to enlargement. As Director of Policy at the ETSC since 2006, she's led the organisation's work advising the European Commission, Parliament and Member States on road safety issues. She has extensive experience working with road safety organisations, policymakers and decision makers across the EU in road safety policy, infrastructure and enforcement. And so today, Ellen is going to be addressing the question, how safe is walking and cycling in the EU? Ellen, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Martina. Thanks for the invitation. I just want to check, is the sound all right?
Absolutely perfect.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to be presenting the findings of 2 of our most recent reports from the European Transport Safety Council about road safety across the EU, which are highly relevant in relation to the very interesting topic that you've chosen for this lunchtime webinar. So in January, we published a new report. You can go to the first slide, looking at pedestrian and cycling safety across the EU. So we have experts in all the different EU countries that provide us with data, which we then analyze and come up with recommendations. So the data that you see here, we can see that cyclists make up 8% of the pretty much 26,000 people killed in traffic in the EU every year. So there are still quite some differences between the different European countries. But for Ireland, I had a look there. It's 7%. So this is the most recent data from 2016 to 2018. So that's about average. But very clearly, we need to take strong action to improve safety of all the different road users, and including cyclists. So looking at the figures for cyclists, about 44% of those cyclists are over 60, which is another important priority for us to think about. If we go on to the next page, please. So this one, this slide is showing the actual trend. So if the slide before had the as now picture, this is also quite worrying for if we're looking at cyclists, because it shows that cyclist deaths have not come down as fast as pedestrian deaths, minus 19%, or car deaths, minus 24%. So of course, we need to ask questions like, why is that? Has there been an increase in cycling? If we have an increase in cycling, then perhaps there's an increase in risk and an increase in deaths. We tried to collect this data. It's very difficult to collect exposure data. We have it from 8 different countries. And what we can say from that little data that we have is that countries with a relatively high amount of distance cycled, so Denmark, say, or Netherlands, do have a lower cyclist death risk. So that's just 2 snapshots from the data that we collected. I also have, of course, recommendations on what we can do to try to reduce this situation. I mean, the deaths and serious injuries of cyclists and pedestrians as well. But the next slide, please. So that report was published in January. Little did we know that COVID was coming. And COVID, of course, has also had quite an impact on road safety. So the next, I'm just going to give you really one lot of data. We published a report in July looking at the impact of the lockdown. So we were asking our PIN panelists, our experts from across Europe, to send us the data of road deaths, the traffic volume, also the vehicles going above the speed limit, and any special country information to compare April 2020, which is when in a lot of European countries we did have some form of lockdown, compared with the April before that, so an average of 2017 to 2019. And next slide, I just want to show this quite surprising finding. The main finding was that yes, road deaths did decrease, as one would expect, if there was very little movement or a massive reduction in travel, but it didn't drop as far as we thought it would. So in fact, we had a reduction of minus 36%. And actually, you can look in here to the example of Ireland, where we do have the data for the traffic volume. So there was a big drop in traffic volume in Ireland, but the reduction was right down to just the EU average of minus 36%. So now, next slide, please. Of course, we're going to need a lot more time to try to evaluate what went on this last April. And of course, we don't know how the situation will evolve now. For sure, COVID is not over. But here we did have some comments on that data that we did collect from the different panelists from across Europe. And I think that's also very interesting for the discussion today. So for sure, we saw an increase in walking and cycling. We saw introduction of lower speed limits in dense urban areas. We saw that change can happen overnight if there is strong political will. But now we're grappling still with the challenges. So people are worried about using public transport. So the question is, what is the default mode of choice? Is it the car, or is it walking, cycling? We really need to increase the safe infrastructure for vulnerable road users to accommodate these shifts. I'll go on to the recommendations because I don't want to take up too much time. So these two last slides are stemming from both of these reports and certainly overlap. So this is what can we do to improve the situation for pedestrians, but also for cyclists. So we very much also support 30 km/h zones, but that they should also be supported by physical traffic calming. This, in turn, should also be to reduce motor vehicle traffic. So the traffic calming in itself should work to reduce motor vehicle traffic, and this can also then entice pedestrians and cyclists out to use the roads and feel more safe. We also very much support separate cycling paths. So if they're in areas of where the speed limit is over 30 km/h, then they should be physically separated. And if they're in areas of under 30, then everything must be done to try to get those vehicles, the cars, the trucks, the other motorized vehicles, to be driving at appropriate speed, so at least under 30k. Then I think this is the last slide, and as I say, there's really a crossover here. So in relation to our recommendations, looking at coming out of or continuing with the management of COVID and road safety and mobility, we also very much encourage cities, towns such as yourselves in Galway to adapt road safety plans based on the SAFE system. Here to introduce a modal priority. On the right hand of the slide, you'll see this upturned triangle, which has the pedestrians, the cyclists at the top. So yeah, this would be another big ask from our side. I had some slides here on speed. Speed is a very big priority in terms of tackling the safety of pedestrians and cyclists, but I think we'll come back to that perhaps later. So if you could just click through to the slide where I have the 3 ETSC briefings. You can find these online, and I also wanted to mention the European Cyclist Federation, whom we cooperate with very closely. They have prepared a very interesting leaderboard. It's a tracker looking at the kilometers that have been built of new infrastructure across Europe since the COVID crisis came to us in April. And so we've seen 1,000 new kilometers having been built today, with another 1,300 promised. So it's great that they're tracking this as well for us, and I'd only encourage you to put Galway onto their map as well. All right, that's it from me for the moment. I hope you managed to understand me here via the phone. Thank you very much.
We do indeed. Thank you so much, Ellen. And this is thank you so much for dining in. It's great to really some good food for thought there about road safety and speed limits. And this segues very, very nicely to our next guest speaker, Mr. Rod King, MBE. We're absolutely thrilled to have Rod with us here today. He was due to be the keynote speaker at the Road Safety Authority's annual conference in March, but that got cancelled due to COVID. So instead, he's going to give his keynote presentation, or a selection of his keynote presentation, here with us today. Rod is the founder and campaign director of UK's 2020 for Us. And this is a voluntary organisation that campaigns for the introduction of a default 20 miles per hour, about 30 kilometres per hour, speed limit for residential streets and urban streets. And that its heart is a deep concern for child safety and the benefits of lower speeds in neighbourhoods, towns and cities for our youngest residents. 2020 for Us is based in Warrington, England, and has staff in York and London and local campaign groups throughout the UK. And Rod was awarded an MBE for his work in the area of road safety. Rod, you're very welcome. You're on mute, Rod. We'd love to be able to hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us.
And you can see my screen being shared. Is that right? The first slide? That's great. Okay. Well, we're as long as I can make the slides move forward, we're running. So Where are we?
Rod, can you share your screen, please? We can't see that yet.
I can't see it yet. Right. Okay. Let me come back and see how we can do that. Oh, can you see the wrong screen? Is that it?
All we're seeing is your lovely face right now.
Oh, right. Oh, well, we'll try and change that. Has that changed?
Yes, we can see their first slide.
Okay, that's good. So thank you very much for inviting me to Galway. I did once get close. I travelled across on the train to Westport, but I turned right instead of left. So forgive me. But anyway, I always say that I'm really not here to tell you what to do, but maybe talk about what's happening elsewhere. And yes, my sincere apologies, because sometimes I do, you know, lapse into those old units of miles per hour. So, where's the next slide? Yeah, a pile of shoes. This was actually set up in Stockholm at the Third Ministerial Conference there in February. And it represents one pair of shoes for every person who dies every day on our road. That's 3,700 people die across the world on roads. And in fact, I did a calculation that if you take that 3,700 and multiply it up by the number of days, which there have been in 2020, then it exceeds the total official number for deaths from COVID-19. So that really does give us a very clear view of how much road casualties are affecting us. Let's move on from there. So 2020 for us, Love 30. We're a UK-based voluntary organisation. We support communities who want lower speeds for residential streets. And we mean by that 20 mile an hour or 30 kilometres per hour on the default on streets. We call it total 20 across a whole authority or community. It's not speed bumps, and it's exceptions determined locally. And it's very much about retrofitting communities for active travel. And a very important part is that it's community-led, because surveys show consistently that about 70% of people say that 30 kilometers per hour or 20 mile an hour is the right speed limit for residential roads and high streets. But it's important to get that establishment endorsed with an official mandatory speed limit. And yes, our objective is to transform the way our urban and village roads are shared. Well, in 2017, I was delighted to speak at the annual Road Safety Authority conference. And when I spoke then, I made the case for 30 kilometers per hour because of its benefits. Its benefits to children and their protection of the right to use streets and walk or cycle to school. Its benefit in providing the right conditions to enable all of us to decide to walk or cycle. Its benefit for communities to make their towns and villages simply better and more pleasant places to be. And its benefit for particular groups, the elderly, the disabled, the infirm, the invisible disabled, so that they can safely use their streets. And its benefit for air quality and make our places healthier places to be. But today, I'm actually able to speak quite differently, because there's a number of things happened which really make 30 kilometers per hour now a global standard for urban villages. And let's look at that. Just a couple of weeks ago, the UN General Assembly says yes to 30 kilometers per hour. The General Assembly adopted Resolution 74299 on its plans for road safety. And a key element in this was to endorse the Stockholm Declaration which had been approved at that third global ministerial conference in Stockholm. And well, what did that say? This was a high-level conference with many of the road safety ministers around the world present, and 130 of them endorsing that Stockholm Declaration. And there it was in Resolution 11 to focus on speed management, including the strengthening of law enforcement to prevent speeding, and mandate a maximum road travel speed of 30 kilometers per hour in areas where vulnerable road users and vehicles mix in a frequent and planned manner, except where strong evidence exists that higher speeds are safe, noting that efforts to reduce speed in general have a beneficial effect, etc. So here it was, very clearly saying this is the global best practice standard that we're going to be using throughout the world. It really put a nail in the coffin of the idea of a 50 kilometers per hour general speed limit being appropriate for towns and villages. It is no longer fit for purpose. And what is important, this reverses completely the presumption of what is a safe speed on our roads. It reverses the evidence required. You will know, we will know, that wherever you're trying to put in 30 kilometers per hour speed limits, you have to justify it. Why should we go this slow? What's its effect going to be? Do we have to have it here, there, and so on? This reverses that evidence and actually says, look, 30 kilometers per hour is the standard, the default. You have to prove where it's safe for motor vehicles to go faster than 30 kilometers per hour. And that onus is on the local authorities, the national authorities, right, to justify with segregated facilities for pedestrians and cyclists as to why a speed limit should be more than 30 kilometers per hour. Wales, by the way, they have a devolved national responsibility to set national speed limits, and they are planning to set a 32 kilometers per hour or 20-mile-an-hour limit for all the lit roads in Wales. The plan for operation and mandatory by 2023. It would benefit from intelligent speed assistance, speed limiters, which are actually coming on all new car models from 2022. They're also having a very strong communications and publicity program. It's overwhelmingly popular, right, with the people. They're using geomapping to identify the possible exceptions where you could have a higher speed limit. And that's being done, for example, to ensure that it doesn't conflict with where there are residential spaces or whatever. Increased resources for police to enforce, plus, of course, automated enforcement. It's been supported by many national institutions. They've set up a task and finish team, which included NGOs like 20's Plenty. And the great thing was that it got cross-party support in Senate, 44 votes in favor and only 4 against. So very strong right support for that, for putting livability first with a 30 kilometer or 20-mile-an-hour limit. I guess the choice is Ireland. Can it be next with a default 30 kilometers per hour? Well, you know, the current practice is too slow to implement. It's too cumbersome. It ends up as too isolated. There's no consistency in setting limits. It varies from one county or authority to another. The guidelines really don't help that much. An isolated 30 kilometers per hour, they endorse non-compliance. Why should I slow down to 30 kilometers per hour here when a road which looks exactly the same in an adjacent town has got a 50 kilometers per hour limit? But now the world has moved forward, and with 30 kilometers practice, why not implement nationally? It's far cheaper than isolated limits. It's far more consistent. It's centralized engagement and publicity and consistent enforcement, and of course, ISA speed limiters coming in on cars from 2022. So why not Ireland? Ireland has a great record of leapfrogging other nations, finding out what can be done and then saying, hey, we can do that. It can set a livable and safe speeds the English way, place by place, road by road, community or community, or the Welsh way, deciding that they have a national standard and they're going to deliver it for all communities. Its relative lack of progress on 30 kilometers per hour to date actually provides a huge opportunity to gain by a national implementation. So set a national standard of 30 kilometers per hour for all urban village roads. Let local councils decide on exceptions only where evidence of safety exists, and just do it. Do it well and do it soon. Thank you very much for your attention. If you love Ireland and its people, then maybe it's time to love 30 like the majority of the people in Ireland do. Thank you very much.
Rod, thank you so much for that really uplifting and challenging presentation. I think you kind of something like, why not? Why not indeed? So here Galway City has just finished a public consultation process about revised speed limits. There is a proposal to reduce the inner city speed limit to 30 kilometers per hour, which we of course would very much support. However, there are also proposals to increase some road speeds within our city, which we have submitted that this is not a great idea. There's even a road with a proposed speed limit of 80 kilometers per hour outside a national school, which is, I think it's safe to say, absolutely crazy, and this should not go forward. So we would also say that the 30 kilometers speed zones, as you say, it should be connected. So our residential areas, our residential estates that are taken in charge by the council already have, most of them already have a speed limit of 30 kilometers per hour. We think these, as you point out, these should be connected. So there is for matters of clarity, consistency, for understanding of all road users, and as you say, all the different benefits that you outlined at the beginning. So well, thank you so much for that. And there's so much we can talk about later in the Q&A. But now I'd like to introduce Matthew Baldwin to maybe perhaps reflect on what we've heard both from Ellen and from Rod. Matthew is Deputy Director General of DG Move at the European Commission, and he was appointed just almost 2 years ago exactly as the European Coordinator for Road Safety and Sustainable Mobility, the first European coordinator with such a role. And these issues are now the main focus of his professional activities. He's also managed the Commission's network of COVID-19 transport contacts, with a particular focus on helping find a coordinated, safe and sustainable way out of this crisis. In his Commission career of more than 20 years, he has served in the cabinets of President Barroso, Commissioner Lamy and Commissioner Hill, and the last as the head of cabinet. He's also been Director of Market Access and Industry in DG Trade and Director of Aviation in DG Move. Matthew is of Italian and British nationality, has 2 sons, speaks English, French and Italian, and lives in Brussels. And yesterday, he was declared as the #1 EU social media influencer for transport. Matthew, you're very, very welcome.
Can you hear me, or do I need to use the phone?
Please use the phone, if you can use the phone.
All right, doesn't work. I feel like a sports reporter from the 1970s. It's still goalless here at the Den between Millwall and Bristol Rovers. Look, it's great to be with you. Fantastic presentations from Ellen and Rod. And Martina, my question kind of remains to you. How did you end up with 3 Brits on this seminar? I think aren't the days of the British telling the Irish what to do are over. But anyway, notwithstanding, I want to pick up what Rod was saying at the end there about picking up the COVID point, because so much I hear all the time from campaigners across Europe as they're pushing for reduced speed limits, for road safety, for sustainable mobility, is we can't do it because the public doesn't want to do it. You know, in Galway, I hear this in Tralee, I hear it in Cork, I hear it in Dublin. And when you pick up what Rod said, we are going to probably lose more people on the roads globally this year than we're going to lose to the COVID-19 virus. It's going to be close, but it's certainly in the same order of magnitude. Yet, the public has accepted a huge effort to tackle the coronavirus in support of public health, has accepted the huge damage to the economy and to the livelihoods and all the jobs that have been lost. I'm not knocking that huge effort by government. It was necessary. But you see where this is going. You know, if we could have 10% of that effort for road safety, we would be making the world so much a safety place on a regular basis. And unlike for COVID-19, the action, the dramatic public action necessary for road safety as well as for COVID saves public money. We lose between 1 and 2% of our GDP in Europe for the cost of road crashes. So if we can start to address that, we will be saving money and doing things this way. I talk about costs because I think everyone on the seminar, I saw someone in the chat pointing out we're preaching the converted. I'm sure everyone on this seminar wants more livable and more lovable cities. What we need is good arguments for those who aren't necessarily having that at the top of their agenda. So let's talk a bit about costs. In the European Union, we have analyzed what the external costs of transport are on the rest of society. And we have a scarcely believable, but I can guarantee you verifiable number of 1 trillion euros a year is the external cost of transport. And it goes in areas like environmental costs, CO2, terrible air quality, habitat degradation. It goes on road congestion, and it goes on the cost of road crashes. So just for example, with one public policy, if we can start to reduce our dependence on the private car in cities, we start to address all of these areas of public, of external costs. It's not just about trees and flowers and beautiful places to live and breathe, and we're all in favor of that. It's about hard economic reality. In the European Union, it's all about the European Green Deal. The recovery from COVID must be green. We're coming with a new strategy on smart and sustainable mobility. There's a huge pile of new money on the table in the form of the Recovery and Resilience Fund, 750 billion euros. My simple message to this community of cities and activists is tell the Irish government that you want to see money spent in the Irish National Plan on sustainable urban mobility and give them some ideas as to where it could be spent. I'm sure you have them. In the shorter term, it's such an honor to follow Ellen and Rod. I mean, they've been campaigning this stuff for years, and finally now, guys, you are winning. If you just look at what's happened today, also earlier this week, Bilbao, which is a bit bigger than Galway City, 300,000 people, and they have just reduced their speed limit on all roads to 30 kilometers per hour. Not just, as Rod was rightly saying, the default, meaning it's 30 unless you can prove it's safer, on all the roads. They're the first city in the world to do that. In Brussels, we're going to a default 30 kilometer speed limit from the 1st of January 2021. It can be done. Don't listen to people when they tell you, oh, it rains too much in Galway, it's too hilly, the people don't want it. It can be done, it's up to us, let's do it. My last point, and that is, please work in partnership with us, work in partnership with regions, work in partnership with national governments, and work in partnership between sustainable urban mobility players. Sometimes, just sometimes, I hear about, the cyclists saying, we don't need public transport, everyone should get on their bikes. And we hear about argy-bargy on the pavements between cyclists and walkers. If we allow ourselves to be divided, we will be ruled. It is about developing that kind of sustainable urban mobility coalition that we will make the cities the lovable, livable, breathable, safe places we all want. I stop now, Martina, because you've heard too much already from English presentations, and let's have some back there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Listen, we're all European here, so we are, and we're always happy to be creating allies and learning from experts, and that you all happen to be from our good neighbours next door. That's all right with us. So thank you so much for joining with us today. I think you've really kind of helped bring some of the points that both Ellen and Rod have spoken so eloquently and passionately and backed by data by. And there's a lot of questions coming here into the chat. So we have about 15 minutes or so for some questions and some discussion. And I know that Rod, Ellen, and yourself, Matthew, are really keen to get to the discussion part of this lunchtime webinar. So we've heard a lot about public engagement and public support for lower speed limits, for default lower speed limits, and that speed limit to be 30 kilometers per hour. How exactly did you get there? What exactly happened? Was there a big media campaign? Was there state bodies who were articulating this? How long did it take? Like, what was the process of getting people from thinking 50k kilometers per hour is grand to, you know what, we need to be at 30? How do you change the hearts and minds of individual cities, like in the case of Bilbao, or indeed countries like Wales? Rod, would you like to take that first?
Well, the first thing which I would say is that you don't need to change people's minds. There's an idea which is called pluralistic ignorance. It's when you may believe something, but you don't think the rest of society believes it. So you keep quiet about your beliefs, right? And that's what happens about speed limits. When the British Social Attitude Survey has been conducted on transport issues for around about 10 years now. And when asked that question, is 20 mile an hour the right speed limit for residential areas, right, then consistently it comes back at 70% for and 10% against. So the point is, if you go out and ask people about what they want for their roads, their streets, what sort of road they will be comfortable shopping in, they will come back and tell you 30 kilometers per hour. So it's like much of campaigning. It's not about convincing the public, it's about convincing the politicians who are concerned about what the public thinks. So make that support tangible and then take that to the politicians, because once they realize that this is what people want, then they will actually deliver it. And you know, wherever 20 mile an hour limits are putting in the UK, we find the support of residents goes up by a further 10%. So it's one of those things, people want it, but they don't think they can have it. Once they got it, they say, thank you very much, and they want more of it.
Can I jump in on that one?
Absolutely, please.
No, I completely agree with Rod, and the comparison I would make, and I think we're starting to turn the corner, is also on drink drive. 20 years ago, people across Europe, and certainly in Ireland, drink, you know, it was a question of whether you're going to get caught. And I think we've turned the corner now in terms of how society sees that. I don't think any of us will allow our friends to go off drinking and driving. And I slightly disagree with Rod. We've got one more push is still needed about the acceptability or otherwise of speeding. I think people are turning their mind, and the latest social attitudes to driving surveys show that, but we need to keep pushing. And I missed one statistic from what I said earlier, and I think this is literally a killer statistic. When we talk, if you go back to Ellen's slides about different speed limits in town, if you have a 50 kilometer speed limit and the de facto speed being driven is 60, at that speed, 90% of pedestrians and cyclists do not survive a collision with a motor vehicle. If you bring that speed down to 30 kilometers an hour or 20 miles per hour in Rod's language, your survival rate rises to 90%. So you reverse that 90-10%. And when you explain that to local politicians, picking up Rod's point, it's the knowest of no-brainers, because it's about the safety of the kids and the citizens in the city. And I think if there's one figure, apart from all the cost crap I was giving you, I would bang on that statistic, which is borne out by study after study. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. That's indeed that. You said that 90-10 ratio, 30-60 kilometers per hour. That's a statistic that we do bang about here and go in. Every time I repeat that, either in writing or the radio or discussions here with members of Galway Cycle Campaign, every single time it does make my heart sink to my heels. It's just unbelievable, because when you're behind the windscreen, and of course most of us who cycle also drive, most of us are car owners as well, it doesn't feel particularly fast. There's a it doesn't feel very different from 50 to just be a couple of K over the limit to 60. But the impact, when it's just physics, the impact of a big object meeting a small child is devastating. So thank you. And I wanted to turn to Ellen, and we can see, Ellen, you've got your camera working, so that's fantastic. Great to see you. A question here, and on the phone as well. I love this, all sorts of technology to make this webinar happen today. I have a question for you here around the area of Dutch sustainability and kind of road safety policy. And so under Dutch sustainable safety, the approach to 30 km/h limits, they're also supported by measures to exclude through traffic or arterial traffic from local roads. So is the exclusion of arterial traffic from local/residential roads also part of EU safety policy?
No, not yet. I mean, Matthew, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I guess that might come up if you as a city were preparing a sustainable urban mobility plan, which included a road safety target and measures to support that. That might be one of the actions that you would take. So through the urban mobility policy. And then the other area, there is a directive on, so we have got EU legislation on infrastructure safety, but it's only for the higher speed roads, so motorways, two-lane fast roads. So it's just been revised, and the Commission, together with the support of the countries, will be preparing now new guidance on looking at the safety of pedestrians, cyclists, and powered two-wheelers. But, well, yeah, the question will be which roads would that be applied on? But I think one of the key things in that Dutch sustainable safety approach is thinking about the function of the road and doing a speed limit review. So coming back to the example that you gave of the 80k road going past the school, why?
Question we're asking.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Ellen. Question here, maybe again for yourself, Ellen, and or Matthew, around maybe something that could be applied at the EU level, which is our speedometers on our cars. So, so somebody here has written in that my car's speedometer is centered at 100 kilometers per hour. Is there any European move to have the 12 o'clock position on the speedometer dial standardized to 50 kilometers per hour? So a driver can easily kind of tell the difference between 20, 30 and 60 kilometers per hour, etc.
Can I come in on that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, sorry, you can correct me, Ellen. I want to pick up both the question from Shane and on this one, because it's important point to keep in our minds this horrible beast we call subsidiarity. Although my countrymen sometimes think it doesn't work that way, the EU doesn't work just with the Commission telling everybody what to do all of the time. Most of these things are not set at the level of the European competence. So particularly on the question that Shane was asking about excluding arterial traffic from local residential roads, these are national or local competencies. We can have a big argument, and I probably end up disagreeing with Rod. I don't think that's such a bad thing, because what it means is that communities get to decide things. It's much easier to drive a 30-kilometer speed limit when the citizens are saying, we are fed up with you driving your car through my village, rather than, as we saw in France, a top-down, you will all drive slower at the decree of the president, which was a very valiant thing to do, but it was not necessarily as politically useful. That said, Ellen is right. There are areas of European legislation where we're starting to move into this direction. We have not yet included urban roads explicitly within the scope of our road infrastructure safety legislation. We have very technical rules on cars, and now I just want to come to the question you just put. Included in that will be, from 2022, intelligent speed assistance on all new models, and it will be mandatory on all new cars from 2024. And we are currently discussing exactly how those rules will work. But, and I suspect we won't go down in such a detailed way as to decide on what the speedometer should say. It's a neat idea in terms of keeping people's speeds down. But we will, for example, there will, I hope, be a constant visual reminder on your what you call it, you know, your
Dashboard.
What's it called, your console. There will be a constant visual reminder of your speed in relation to the speed limit, and there will be other, I hope, a haptic control, perhaps through the accelerator pedal, you'd actually have to push through to exceed the speed limit. So technology can and will play an increasingly important role, I think, in helping us keep speeds down as well as speed limits. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. Rod, would you like to respond to that point of difference, perhaps, with Matthew there? Just wait for you to unmute. There we go.
Yeah, should it be a top-down from the president? Certainly, I wouldn't suggest top-down from any of our prime ministers or presidents. But it's a balance, isn't it? You really have to show that this is what the public consensus is. And really, slower speeds are about changing that consensus as what is the right thing to do. Right, so we have to do that, and that works. So the more activity there is within communities saying, look, we do want to have a speed limit which is more aligned with community needs, then the better it is. But it needs that balance. It needs that community aspiration, but at the same time, it needs that, if you like, the establishment saying, yes, we agree with that. And there are two sides of that. So I can't see a national parliament doing it without feeling that that was what the people and communities wanted. So yes, it's a mixture of the two, but it's very much as Matthew has alluded to, about changing that perception, just like drink drive, right, into saying that this is something which is the right thing to do.
Thanks, Rod. Now we're coming up to the hour, so I'm going to just pose one more question, perhaps all the panel members could answer, and then we will kind of come on and give like a wrap up, takeaway comment or question from the guests. So one of the questions we want to ask here in Ireland, where our road safety targets are focused on injuries and death. We would say we would like our road safety targets to include things like participation rates of different kind of road users. So the numbers, the percentage of children cycling to school, of older people biking to shop to do their supermarket grocery shopping. Does the European policymakers and do any other European countries have a more holistic view of speed limits and targets and the purposes of limiting speeds on our roads? Ellen, do you want to take us off that first?
Yeah, well, Matthew, we're going to have these key performance indicators, right? So, so the EU, we've just adopted, there's a new road safety strategy, and all countries will be contributing, including Ireland. And so I think we're starting off with 8 or 10 key performance indicators, which includes, for example, speed. So that means the countries will have to gather the data on the levels of compliance with the different speed limits on the different roads. And in the next stage, this is what ETSC is calling for, that we should actually also have a target. So I don't know if that flashed up, but on urban roads, between 35 and 75% of people are not obeying with the speed limit. So a target could be for urban that you would bring it down to only, I don't know, plus 10% of people who are not compliant. That would be very ambitious, but at least to try. So we've got these new key performance indicators that will be coming. From our side, ETSC, we would like to see specific targets, especially for priority groups such as pedestrians and cyclists, as I mentioned at the very beginning. And also what we tried to do in our report, which was to gather, so this report was to gather the exposure data. So I guess that's coming back to what you were saying, like how many people are cycling, how many kilometers, and use that as a way of giving a more nuanced view of this raw data of X cyclists killed in the Netherlands.
Thank you, Ellen. Matthew, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, please. I mean, what this question goes to is what I hope is now going to be an unbreakable connection between road safety on the one side and sustainable mobility on the other. They're not separate disciplines or different ideas, and they've been left separate for too long. And I think groups like you and people like Rod and Ellen have been fundamental in doing that. Question then is, what targets and what numbers we must collect. I'm a bit of a believer in simplicity here. The key data we need to collect on road safety is the death and serious injuries, and break it down clearly for as many categories as possible. As Ellen was saying, the numbers have declined least slowly for cycling. That is a problem. Vulnerable road users are becoming more vulnerable in our towns and cities, and that must stop. As to whether or not we link it to very specific targets about modal use, I'd love to see more numbers on biking. But again, let's set big targets for ourselves. Let's say to cities, we want to see 0 carbon emissions by 2030. Let's see 0 fatalities, and that means 70% of those being cyclists and pedestrians by 2030. It can be done. Don't say it can't be done. Helsinki have done it. Oslo have done it. And all these cities are setting themselves these targets. And then you can leave a little bit of room for maneuver over how much is done with cycling and how much is done with public transport and how much is done with walking. You guys in the cycling world, push for your own indicators, but let's go for the big prize, and then everything will fall into place, both on road safety and on sustainable mobility. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. And now, Rod, the final word to you, please. Rod, you need to unmute, please.
I think we need to just really find the way in which we debate about 30 kilometers and 50 kilometers per hour limits. We've done it so often about comparing what it's like to drive at 30 or 50 kilometers per hour. And we need to start that debate about what it's like to be a child or a pedestrian within a 30 or a 50 kilometer per hour environment. My favorite ask of politicians is to ask them to stand at the side of the road and then crouch down to the height of an 8-year-old. See what it's like when a truck goes past at 50 kilometers per hour. Whether that's a strategic road or no, it doesn't matter. For that child, there's no more strategic road than the road from their house to their school. And I think we need to have this debate in that sort of atmosphere where we say, how long does it take the 80-year-old to get across the road? What do our cities and communities and villages feel like for people who don't want to be in cars or cannot be in cars? We keep doing that. And it doesn't matter whether they're cycling or walking or whatever. We find the interventions which will work, right? And we get those interventions put into place for all of us.
Rod, I think we can leave the webinar right there on that wonderful kind of final comment. Thank you so much. I want to take the opportunity now to thank our 3 guest speakers this afternoon. Ellen Townsend from the European Transport Safety Council, Rod King, MBE from 20s Plenty for Us, and Matthew Baldwin, the first European Coordinator for Road Safety and Sustainable Mobility. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in today for this webinar. We've been delighted to have you join us for our Bike Week 2020 webinar series, funded by Galway County and City Councils under the Government of Ireland Active Travel Initiative. We hope to see you soon for more cycling friendly, walking friendly, mobility, sustainability friendly events. Join us again for today. Thank you.